Antioch, the city where Christians got their name. A presentation by Gerald Anderson. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. We read this in the book of Acts, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. The Bible's most prolific writer and arguably the most important evangelist for my conversion, as Paul cemented the formation of the church for the Gentiles as well as the Jews. Antioch turned out to become the home base for all three of Paul's major journeys, and it is where he started to preach to the populace of Asia Minor. It is for this reason that Antioch, while not Jerusalem by itself, most definitely ranks up there as far as an important hub for Christianity. While the population of Antioch had different ethnic origins, the heart of the city was Greek. This meant that it was organized as a Greek polis, with elected magistrates, a council, and an assembly of its citizens. Even during the Roman period, this assembly was comprised of members of the local aristocracy, in accordance with Rome's policy of relying on the cooperation of the local elite to handle local affairs and to govern in the name of Rome. Usually, as long as this did not interfere with Roman rule, each city was permitted to keep its own customs and laws. Each polis formed one specific part in a pan-Hellenic religious system, which basically constituted one religious ideal, and religion was perceived as the facet of the polis, ideology that all citizens should respect most. Thus, a sign of disrespect towards religion is a sign of disloyalty towards the polis. Within each polis, religion operated on different levels. On one level, we find the cult of those divinities that were connected to the identity and protection of the actual polis. Zeus and Apollo had a special status in Antioch, since they were considered the protectors and founders of the Seleucid dynasty. And when the city was founded, Seculus I erected a temple for Zeus with a statue of Apollo. While the Greek pantheon basically consisted of the 12 Pan-Hellenic Olympian deities, on a local level, various gods had different traits and characteristics. One way of dealing with the multiplicity of gods was through a firm structure of calendars of festivals. The culmination of such festivals was the animal sacrifice in the temple of each god, with the ensuing civic banquet through the participants constantly reactivating their relationship to the gods and to the polis. According to the historian Josephus, Jews were among the original settlers of Antioch. He claims that Seleucus I was the Nicator, the founder of the city, granted them some privileges. He also gave them legal status. There are reasons to assume that the Jewish communities and the diaspora were considered one of the many collegia. Although with privileges going far beyond those of others, there were inferences to the attitudes of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar towards the Jews as evidence of this. When Julius Caesar prohibited all collegia in the empire, sometime between 49 and 44 BCE, he excluded some of the most ancient ones. Among them was Judaism. When Augustus Caesar took action against the collegia, the synagogues were again exempted, which indicates that the synagogue was treated as a kind of collegium on its own right. However, as L.V. Rutgers has shown regarding the situation in the city of Rome, protection and privileges could easily be abolished and were given a condition that the law and order were to be always maintained under Roman rule. For several centuries, Antioch was the capital of Syria. Antioch, because of its location, had strong financial ties and political allegiances to Greece as well as to Rome. The city of Antioch was so large that during the excavation, archaeologists found two major barracks. And the size of these barracks would have been able to hold at least 2 different legions at any given time. And up until about the middle of the 1st century, just to show you the size, legions had 5,000 men. During Paul's time, Antioch was a thriving city under Roman rule. The main players during the start of Christianity in Antioch were the ruling Romans, the occupying Greeks, the Jews, both believers of Jesus and non-believers, converted Christians, and Judaizers. Now, if you don't know what a Judaizer is, that is a Christian convert that preached that you still had to follow the law. And what Paul wrote a letter to them about was that, in the letter of Galatians, was that if you were to follow the law, then you're removing the gospel of Jesus. In other words, if I was a Gentile, I would have to be circumcised in order to be a true Christian. And Paul went in there and wrote a letter while he was in prison that stopped that. Paul preached to all groups. And because Paul was a Roman citizen, at that time named Saul, and he was from Tarsus, which is just to the north and the west of Antioch, he was a member of the Jewish ruling council and a Pharisee. He was converted to Christianity on the road to Damascus when Jesus proclaimed him to be his apostle and renamed him Paul. Because of Paul's background in education, he was able to preach to anybody. He was able to accurately, with love and firmness, rebuke the Judaizers. And he talked of the unknown God to the Greeks. Now we're going to read in Acts 17, verses 22 and 23. This was in dealing to the unknown God. Now what this was is they had the 12 pedestals of the Panhellenic gods, their Olympian gods, that most of us know about. And they always had, in their major cities, one blank pedestal that was nothing on it. And they did that just to make sure they didn't offend any other god. Again in Acts 17, starting in verse 22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription to an unknown God. Now what you worship is something unknown. I am going to proclaim to you." Now while he did write that while he did give that while in Greece, it is known that he had used it on several different occasions according to different historians. And I'm going to quote Pliny the Lesser. Paul was seen as someone that could talk to anyone. Because he was able to do so, he convinced many unbelieving Jews and Gentiles about Jesus being the Messiah and the Savior to all. Antioch was a large metropolis. It was very strong, both militarily and financially, and it was politically connected to two of the most major powers at the time. It had access to many different types of cultures, just like we have New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Antonio, or Dallas, Fort Worth. When you look at those cities, they have a lot of different cultures. They also have found during the excavation, and in this picture that you're looking at right now, is one of the synagogues, and they have shown that there were at least 3, maybe more, and this created a fertile place to expand Christianity. Greeks also had a tendency to be educated. Unlike some of the other dynasties of that era, Greeks found that thinking and logic and teaching were as reverent as any other form of religion. I want to take this time to thank you for looking and listening, and I gave my thoughts about Antioch. I hope that you have a blessed day.